Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to go over X-Men Black Mojo. Well, sort of. I'm going to go over the guy who actually wrote X-Men Black Mojo. What's his name? Scott Ackerman. If you actually want a review of X-Men Black Mojo, go over to the Umbrella Guys channel. He did a really good review of it because, of course, Mojo in this book is a representation of comicsgate. They literally take 2 pages and put words of comicsgate in his mouth for 2 pages. And that's what the book is really about. But I want to go over this guy who wrote it because he did an interview for Marvel.com, and it's a fairly long interview for Marvel.com. Really, it's not a long interview for anything else or for old-looking interviews with comic pros. But he talks about why he wrote X-Men Mojo and how he wrote it. And really, this is just right from the horse's mouth why these people cannot write not just heroes, but villains as well. Because I've gone over a number of times why they can't write heroes. This is just an example right from the horse's mouth why these people can't even write a villain either. And that's why they can't write anything, really. And it's bizarre because it's not just the guy who doesn't know what's going on who's being interviewed. Even the guy who's doing the interviewing, really, he has no clue either. It's like a double-blind episode of, I don't know, Candid Camera, where the guy who's the dupe is not just the fella who they are duping, but the guy who is doing it's really bizarre. Neither of these people, neither the guy being interviewed nor the guy doing the interviewing, have a clue. And they both work for Marvel, by the way. And when I say have a clue, I mean they don't have a clue about how to write a hero, how to write a villain, how to even write a good story at all. And gee, that's the kind of people you want working at Marvel, right? Right off the bat, the guy at the very top of this interview, the guy who's doing the interviewing says, Tony Stark inspires people to become inventors. Carol Danvers inspires people to become pilots. Frank Castle inspires people to keep an eye on their kids in public. The real world power of superheroes lies in how they move us to be better, to reach higher. You're an idiot. That's not what happens. Tony Stark does not inspire people to become inventors, or Carol Danvers inspire people to become pilots, or Frank Castle to inspire people to look at their kids and keep a better eye on them. No, you're an idiot. Okay? Superheroes inspire people to be heroic. That's what they're for. That's what they're supposed to do. The fact that Tony Stark is an inventor, or Carol Danvers is a pilot, or Frank Castle is a good father, those are things you do to identify with the character so that you can feel heroic, because the main reason of a superhero is to be heroic. They're supposed to inspire people to be heroic. He has no clue. And then he goes on to say that the real power of superheroes lies in how they move us to be better, to reach higher. Now you see all the soft language that they use, right? These are things that are subjective, better, higher, subjective, of course. And of course, these people are all about everything being subjective. You can't actually talk about good and evil, right and wrong, because that's what an actual hero is supposed to be about, and an actual villain is supposed to be about. So, like I said, from the very beginning, I'm not going to go over this entire thing, but this guy who's doing the interviewing, he has no clue. But I want to go over more the guy who actually wrote X-Men Black Mojo, because talking about people who have no clue, this guy is just beyond SJWism, just pours out of him, right? And I'm only going to read a little bit of what he says in it, because he says a lot of stuff and he kind of jumps around. I mean, listening to a SJW trying to explain himself is like trying to put a puzzle together that was created by a drunken Martian. It's just, you can't even follow any kind of train of thought at all. And that's the entire thing. You can't follow any train of thought because there really is no train of thought. And that's what this guy shows through and through with this interview. I'm going to read just a couple of sections though, right? He says, when he's talking about Mojo, he says, for me, I found that the reason I wasn't necessarily enjoying him, which was Mojo, that much is because I felt like for the most of his appearances, he didn't have a lot of clear emotional stakes that was going through. He was merely a satirical character. And then he goes on just a little bit down and says, but then I also had this other idea that as I was looking at these pictures of Mojo, just how the shorthand for how evil he is how ugly he is. So the grotesqueness of the character is like a visual shorthand to tell young people that this is a character who is as evil as he is ugly. Like, what a bummer for ugly people. And then he laughs. because he actually thinks that's funny. And oh, by the way, this guy is supposed to be a comedian. Yeah. And then he goes on. You see it pop up everywhere. You see it in Lord of the Rings. Gollum is ugly, so he is evil. You see it in so much fantasy fiction. Anytime you see anything really, really ugly, you're afraid of it. I just felt like ugly people are getting such a bad rap. Because we can all feel ugly, you know what I mean? I don't think that should necessarily be equated to someone's inherent goodness. And then he goes on at the bottom to connect to this thought and says, that's why I started getting really excited about this particular story when I started thinking about not only the fact that Glob and Mojo are both ugly, but also the human aspect, how to humanize them. I just started thinking about that in regards to all people who are feeling like they are not considered human beings in the eyes of the people who want to oppress them. I think that's sort of the theme of this book. The more you get to know someone and don't see them as a stereotype, the more likely you are to not be able to oppress them. Mojo is less likely to be able to actually enact his plan of killing the X-Men when he starts seeing them as actual people. I think that's what the X-Men are all about. And that's his final word on this book. Now, you can tell this guy is just an SJW. I mean, socialist, communist-minded person. Why? Because it's all about oppression for them. He's steeped in identity politics as well, right? Because it's all about oppression. It's not just, well, some people are oppressed. It's automatic assumption at the very basis of everything is oppression. So you got your SJW right there. And just to let you know, because I suppose some people might not know this, but if you're talking to anybody in North America or the Western world and the word oppression comes out of their mouth, as soon as they say that word, a giant red flag should raise in your mind, and you should say to yourself, oh, I should back away slowly. I should back away slowly because this is a crazy person. This is a crazy person. Because really, that's what they are. And I want to go over his language just for a second, and it really, really shows why this guy is speaking like he does. So what does he say up top? He says that I found that the reason I wasn't necessarily enjoying him that much is because I felt like, for the most of his appearances, he didn't have a lot of clear emotional stakes. Yeah, here's the theme that runs through everything he says. It's all about feels. It's all about emotion, right? Everything is about this. And when he talks about it a little farther down, he says, well, he talks about people being afraid of the ugly, And then he says, because we can all feel ugly, you know what I mean? And then when he talks about it at the very end of the article, he is even more steeped in this. He talks about humanizing these ugly characters. And he says, I just started thinking about that in regards to all people who are feeling like they are not considered human beings. Right? Again with the feels. Because that's what it's all about. Right through everything he talks about. It's all about feeling. It's all about emotion. It's all about being afraid or not being afraid. So it's all about emotion. And it's really funny because he keeps on talking about when I started thinking about these things. He's not thinking about anything. He's just using his emotions. And what is he trying to say here? What is he trying to say? He's trying to say that, of course, there are these people who are oppressed because everybody is ugly, of course. This is what your SJW thinks, right? Everybody is ugly. So the thing is that you shouldn't oppress them because once you get to know someone, that is to say, emotionally know them, because you're afraid of them because you don't emotionally know them. So once you emotionally get to know these people, then you will not feel like oppressing them anymore because they will be human to you. That's his entire point here, right? This is what the book is centered around. And he talks about it in terms of kids, of course, because they want to brainwash the children into thinking that, no, you don't actually think. All you do is use your feels for everything. You don't actually think about anything. Because that's what he's talking about, right? It's all about feeling. You got to humanize people. You got to get to know them because you got to feel what they're doing and what they're going through. You got to feel it. And so you won't oppress them anymore when you actually know how they feel and you feel for them. It's all about feels. All about feels. Let's all get in a little circle and hug together now, right? Oh, this guy's an idiot. But the reason why he can't actually write even a villain is because of this idiotic notion of everything's about feels, because he can't actually consider any of this stuff. He can't actually think about anything because he is trying to teach other people exactly what he is. That is to say, all you do is feel your way through everything, which is ridiculous. So the main reason I wanted to talk about this is because what he talks about the ugly grotesqueness of these characters. Now, this is a type of villain. There's many different types of villain, but this is one specific type of villain. And he talks about it in terms of Mojo and Gollum. And you can obviously see that he has not thought any little bit about these actual things. He supposedly went back and studied Mojo in order to write the character, but no, he doesn't actually think about it. He doesn't actually understand what these characters are actually based upon. He really, really doesn't. And it's no wonder that he can't actually think about anything, because your SJWs, of course, well, any leftist, far leftist, I've studied their ideology both privately and academically for a number of years. You want to boil it down to what it's actually about, any socialist kind of ideology. What it's about is, I want to be selfish. I don't want anything to get in the way of my selfishness, and I want it now. That's basically what it all boils down to. They're just people who want to be selfish. And they want to construct an ideology around the fact that they get to be selfish, get what they want, and get it right now. That's all it is. So these people are selfish people. These SJWs, all it is they're selfish people. And of course, selfish people are shallow. I mean, because all they think about is themselves, obviously. They don't think about other people. They don't think about the world around them, about reality, about good and evil, about truth, nothing like that. They don't think about any of these things. All they think about is themselves. And I use that word think very loosely, because really, all they do is just wade through their own feelings. Oh, and get into it like a warm bath. Just ridiculous. They're shallow people. They're selfish, shallow people who don't know how to think, because they never consider anything except their own feelings. It's ridiculous. Because if this guy, who actually is supposed to be looking into the character of Mojo, actually looked into it and thought about it, he would see that he's got everything bass-ackwards. He just doesn't understand at all. Because he's saying that because the character is ugly, obviously he's evil. He says, you see it in Lord of the Rings. Gollum is ugly, so he's evil. Again, backwards. He's got the entire thing backwards. You know how it works? Because J.R.R. Tolkien is a really good example, because we'll use Gollum like he's doing here, right? He was actually a fairly moral guy. He was trying to get these moral ideas out there because he was writing this for kids, for his kids specifically, and he wanted to bring these things out. If you want to boil down the main themes of Western civilization, going back for more than 3,000 years, you want to boil it down to a couple of key notes. It's the true, the good, and the beautiful. That's what runs through Western civilization, right? And the thing is that the way it works is that what is true is also beautiful. You do good, you're facing that truth. When you face that truth, you reflect it off towards other people, which then makes you beautiful. See, you're like a mirror is the thing. And when you're good, it's like you're polishing up that mirror. You're actually making it high sheen so that when you turn towards the truth, you're reflecting all of that beauty towards other people, and therefore you are beautiful. That's what Western civilization is based upon. Those kinds of ideas. So the opposite works when you're doing a villain, of course. You have Gollum, right? No, Gollum was not ugly when he began. Gollum was just this little guy. He was a hobbit-like creature. He might not have been the most attractive fellow in the world, but he was just a normal hobbit-like creature. And then he got the ring, and he turned towards evil, and he fled off into the darkness, into the caves. And while he was in that darkness for so long, his eyes bulged out in his head and became huge because he had very little light to see. His skin became pale and wan because there was no light down there in the caves. His teeth became sharp because of the nasty creatures he had to deal with and eat. That's the whole point. He wasn't ugly, and therefore that was a shorthand for evil. No. It was that he was evil, and therefore he became ugly because he was evil. Right? That is to say, his ugliness of being Gollum was an outward expression of the inward ugliness that he had already taken onto himself. That's the way it is, right? And so if you have your little paradigm of the true, the good, and the beautiful, these people who embrace evil, what they're basically doing is turning away from good. They take their mirror, they turn it away from good. They try to blacken it and smear it. They try to crack it and warp it. And this is what happens. If any light gets in, it reflects something that's cracked and warped and grotesque. which is this is how you write a villain. This is the idea of a villain. This is where it comes from. Okay? So the thing is that ugliness that he's talking about in this interview, he's talking about that ugliness. Well, that ugliness is a reflection of internal ugliness. That's the whole point of these characters. Like Mojo, because Mojo's the same. You know, Mojos are not actually born that way. He didn't actually look that way when he was born. No, he didn't have spindly legs that look like spider legs made of steel, or a big steel, I don't know what it's like, a tail that looks like something that a scorpion would have, or nor did he have these giant folds of fat, nor did he have these eye hooks that were holding his eyes open when he was born. No, he was just born a normal Mojo, and then that evilness within him reflected onto the external side of him, and he became this grotesque character. That's the whole point of Mojo, just like the whole point of Gollum. This guy doesn't understand it. Not that he just doesn't understand it, he gets it entirely backwards. And he's trying to say that everybody is ugly, but that doesn't equate to someone's inherent goodness. Right? He's saying, oh, these characters can be ugly, but they can still be internally good. You know, that's exactly the opposite of how these characters were developed and what they were supposed to express. The whole point of why they're ugly externally is because they're evil and ugly on the inside. You're an idiot. You can't even understand, even when you actually try to look up these characters and figure out what their motivation is, that this is how they were written. Because, of course, he's an SJW who all he does is he uses his emotion to feel his way through things. And therefore, he doesn't actually think about or consider the fact that these characters were written in a different way than he actually feels. This is ridiculous. This is why these people can't write a villain. Like I said, this is just one type of villain, but this is the villain that he's dealing with. This is the type of villain that he is dealing with here in this Mojo book. And he has no clue. He has no clue. And again, the really sad part of this is because he's talking about he wants kids to read this story. And what does he want to teach the kids to do? Not to think, to feel their way through things, and to accept the internal ugliness of people. Yeah, accept the internal ugliness of people. That's what he wants people to do. See, here's the thing, bub. Right now, let me tell you right now, that if I'm that person that you're talking about, no, I don't feel, I think. And when I get to know you, because look, I didn't know you from a hole in the wall before I read this article. Now I know you better because I listened to you talk for a little while. No, I don't feel like you should be treated any better than you actually are being treated right now. No, I don't. Not at all. I feel quite the opposite. I think someone should oppress you into, I don't know, a mental institution of some kind and get your head examined. Because really, you are an idiot. And this is the whole point. They don't want people to think. They're teaching children not to think. They don't want you to think. If you don't feel your way through everything, if you actually sit there and think about something and consider it according to the other person's point of view or anything else, you're an oppressor. What a bunch of ridiculous people that run Marvel. They're just, drive me insane. And again, not just the guy who's writing this comic, not just the guy who's being interviewed, but the guy who's the interviewer as well. They both have no clue what's going on. They're both so steeped in this kind of idea that they are just oblivious to anything, even any kind of rational thought whatsoever. And this is Marvel today. Anyway, I didn't actually expect this to be a rant, but it kind of turned out to be a rant. If I, gave you anything new to think about or gave you a little chuckle with my rant, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and then leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought about X-Men Black. Really, tell me what you thought about it, if you even picked it up and read it. Because honestly, save your money. Anyways, I'll see you later. Bye.